Welcome to Your Family Dog, a podcast dedicated to helping families love living with dogs.
Hi, welcome back to Your Family Dog. I'm Julie Fudge Smith, and I'm here, of course, with Tina Spring. And today we have one of our many, many special guests, Barbara Dobbins. She's a former dog trainer. She writes about dogs and studies canine ethology. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her two dogs, Tico and Parker, and she's here today to talk to us about spay and neuter. It's not as cut and dry as one may think. And she had a great article in the Whole Dog Journal that came out in May of 2020 called On the Horns of a Dilemma, to neuter or not to neuter, that's the question. So she's here to talk to us today about spay and neuter. And should you or shouldn't you? That's the question. So thank you, Barbara, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, Tina, you got your first question ready to go?
Sure. So, Barbara, I get sorry, I just called you Barbara when it's probably Barb. Barb, I get the question often from specifically puppy owners saying, my vet's saying we should spay and neuter, as soon as the puppy weighs 2 pounds. I'm hearing all sorts of different things. When you have a family approach you about something like that, what are you seeing that the research says? Well, it's not cut and dry. It is, every dog is individual, and including how they're going to respond to spay neuter. So what you have to do, I think, is talk to them about the research that's out there and let them make their own decision.
That's great. So if we're going to talk to them about the research, how are they going to find it? Where are they going to find the information in order to inform themselves?
That's a good question. There are a lot of scholarly articles out there on it. One of the things I like to use is Google Scholar. Not every article is accessible. However, I've had great results. If you just email the authors, they'll usually send you a copy of their paper. So, if you find one, you're like, wow, this looks really interesting, they'll send you a copy of it, So if you don't have access to all these veterinary journals, ask the author themselves, especially if you think it's going to be relevant.
Right. And they're usually really excited that somebody actually wants to read it. So they more than want to send the article to you. It's like, yes, somebody's actually reading my work. So one of the things that we might want to talk a little bit about is, so you email the author and you get Dr. Jones's study. How do you evaluate what he has to say? How do you make sense of a scientific journal article?
That's a really good question. And, we need to look at it critically. We do. We need to start saying, okay, one of the things you might want to look at is, okay, who are the researchers? Where is their money coming from? Let's say it's on nutrition. Well, maybe Purina's sponsoring that, study. So is there a bias because it's sponsored by, somebody with an agenda, what they want to come out of that article. So that's one of the things you have to look at. Let's see. Let me get I wrote a whole list of ideas, about some of the things we want to look for. And this is just general studies, okay, we just talked about where did the funding come from? And then you want to look at competing interests. What are the competing interests of the authors, What are they trying to identify and support? One of the big things that happens, especially in veterinary research, are biases. You have everything from referral bias, which happens frequently when, we're looking at a lot of these retrospective studies that come out of the veterinary schools, because what they're looking at is historical data, such as from the veterinary medical database. And those are medical records. And so those animals, are already part of a specialized group, because they're already coming into they're already being seen at a veterinary hospital, so it may not be representative of the population at large.
Good point.
Then what about the design of this study? I remember doing a piece. I looked at a study on pesticide control, for example, and so they did all this. They did all these questionnaires to people, but they didn't ask about diet. They didn't ask about environment. They didn't ask all these questions. And I'm thinking, that's a huge misstep, in my opinion, in the design of the paper, because you've really got to look at the entire picture of the dog to be able to determine influences. So, and then similarly to that, recall bias. So if you're doing a study that has, that you're asking owners and you're asking them to, say, hey, has your dog experienced this? They may not remember, or they've changed, and so recall bias can come into it.
When you were talking about environmental things, one of the things that people don't understand is when you're doing a research study, what you want to try and do is eliminate the most variables that you can. So if you are not adjusting for, age, environment, food, that kind of thing, then you are not eliminating those variables within the study, and they may or they may not influence the results of what you're doing. So one of the things that I look for in the study is if I think about something like that, they should be explaining in their procedures how they tried to eliminate variables so that they knew they were testing for that particular variable. And that's something to be aware of is how many variables are going on here, and how do you know you've eliminated for the variable you're looking for?
Exactly. And I really respect when the authors say, here are things that we need, that we were aware of. These were inherent biases that we were aware of, so whether it's, referral or, funding or things like that. So that's important.
Right. And some of those things can be adjusted for in the statistics, but not all of them can be.
Well, let's maybe talk a little bit specifically about where a lot of these veterinary studies on spay neuter come from. A lot of it is a retrospective study, so it's not, it's not controlled in any way. And it's not randomized. So they're looking at past medical data, and that then becomes dependent on the accuracy of that original medical record. So, and it limits that group, as I said, a specialized group, to those that were seen at vet teaching hospitals. It's called the Veterinary Medical Database. I think there's 27 North American vet hospitals that contribute to this. So it's a great source of data, but it's limited to what's there.
Right. So I think what we're saying is that you need to try to be objective when you're reading these studies and not just read the headlines and not just say, oh, this study says, and read it carefully, because you may think that the headline, according to some journalists, says, spay neutering causes cancer. Well, there's probably something more behind the headline, and headlines are intended to attract your attention, not necessarily to inform you fully of what the study's all about.
Yeah. Popular press tends to simplify. I think, unfortunately, a lot of these studies, they get a hold of one little nugget and, like, oh, look, and granted that nugget's probably really important, but it's not the full picture. And we just can't hold on to that. And I think you were asking about people who ask me about it. It's usually because they've got a hold of this one little nugget and they want to know more. Right. And so that becomes an opportunity to educate them on, okay, well, let's look at this study that you're referring and start talking about it.
Right.
So what are some surprising data when you've dug into all this data? What are some things that would surprise people to learn from the information you've collected?
This is in the article, but this all kind of originated when my young border collie pup started to develop an orthopedic issue. And so he had to have multiple surgeries as a young pup, to correct this. And I started to think about, well, do I want him to have to undergo an anesthetic during spay neuter? I mean, another anesthetic after this is all done. It's like, okay, so I asked his, and a lot of people were saying to me, it's like, oh my God, you really want to spay neuter him at this, age because of his growth plates? And I'm like, I don't know, so I asked his orthopedic surgeon, and he works on a lot of agility dogs. And he said, Yeah, I haven't seen that. And granted, that's anecdotal, but if somebody working on the bones of these dogs didn't see a problem or a correlation between, early spay neuter and bone issues, then that was good enough for me at the time. So, and I went ahead and did it. And, since then I started writing this article, and, there's a few things I probably would have looked at more closely. And a lot of that has to do with ethics. So, and I think that for me is the most surprising thing is ethically, is it right to spay and neuter? Is it ethically okay, for lack of a better word, to maim our dog? In a lot of countries, it's considered mutilation akin to ear cropping and, declawing and tail docking. So that's one of it. But I think too, sorry, there's a lot of information here, and I'm trying to make sure we get it all in. I think when we get right down to it, I think the most interesting thing was it's a toss-up. When you look at all the factors, pro and con, it's almost 50-50, So whatever your decision you make, you look at that information, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting too is I feel like I get a lot of interesting information from a variety of sources. Right now we happen to have 2 female dogs. I normally have male dogs, so this is a new adventure for me. And both of the breeders, one is a flat-coated retriever and the other one is a Clumber Spaniel. And both breeders have said they didn't want the dogs spayed until after their first heat. Whereas my vet says to me, no, we want to spay before the first heat, because I've got a study that shows that you dramatically decrease the chance of, uterine and mastectomy, all cancers in females by, spaying them before their first heat. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure. Well, with Zuzu, we got her after she had her first heat. She wasn't around any other females, so she didn't go into heat again. And I had her spayed. This was kind of cruel, on her second birthday. That's the kind of thing. It's hard for owners to know what to do when their breeder saying one thing, or the shelter saying one thing, like, oh no, we need to spay at 8 weeks of age, and no, you need to wait until after the first heat, or no, we need to do it after 8 weeks but before the first heat. It's very difficult for owners to know what to do when they feel like they're getting conflicting information from a variety of sources, which is why I think it's important for them to be able to do their own research and to understand how to interpret the results so they can make the best decision for their particular dog.
I think that's a great example that you just gave regarding, the spaying of your dog, simply because, there is some controversy. In fact, my sister just texted me the other day. She goes, okay, we've got someone here saying that now it's recommended that the spay does not take place until after the second heat, And so, okay, where is this coming from? So we start getting all this different information. But with spay, there's some really curious things that happen with estrogen. And let me just read this to you. It's thought that females that have undergone several estrus cycles, potentially cancerous cells have been sensitized to estrogen, making estrogen protective as long as the female remains intact. So then the problem becomes, if the female is neutered after several estrus cycles, and the estrogen's removed, those estrogen sensitized cells can then become neoplastic. So neutering before, those cells don't become neoplastic, aren't sensitive to neoplastic. But after, they've already been enhanced by the estrogen and have a tendency to be. So how do you know?
Well, that's right. And what do you mean by several estrus cycles? Are we talking, what does several mean? Does that mean 2? Does that mean 6? What does that mean? So this is tough stuff.
So I'm probably the weird outlier, right? My parents have been breeding and showing dogs since 1979. I grew up in the company of intact animals, and all of the associated stuff that goes with that, right? And I think one of the things that I say to families a lot is we don't have the opportunity to do it both ways, right? I had a male Jack Russell Terrier who my staff will tell you was sweetness and light. He probably would have been he was crazy healthy. He lived to almost 18 years old, never had any medical problems that weren't the typical, I'm a Jack Russell and I ate something and gave myself the occasional bowel obstruction kind of issue. So he probably would have been a really great pet dog daddy, right? Like he was everything someone wanted in a dog. Social with dogs, good with other animals, great with people, lovely, lovely dog. He was neutered when he was, 7 months old. So would he have been the same dog had he remained intact? My experience is yes, he would have. But I think lots of families worry in all of the different mathematical issues of what risks and rewards they're taking. When people ask me what I do, I don't do girls because I don't want to have to deal with heat cycles. Thank you very much. I know that probably makes me a terrible human being. I'm okay with that. If that's the worst thing I ever do, then life's good. So we do have males, and they are allowed to keep their equipment so long as their equipment is not a problem. So typically my boy puppies are going to stay intact until they're at least 2 because it seems like they do get some very real benefits just maturationally of being allowed to be intact males and move more toward maturity. And I like that from a stability of temperament perspective. But I'm sure that there are 18 research papers on why I'm absolutely wrong, because I'm just looking at the microcosm of my own home and my own family and my skill and dogs I pick and all that stuff.
Which
so
is exactly everyone should do, is decide for themselves. Does this work for me?
So I've heard it said that if you have let's say you have a litter of puppies and it's all boys, we're gonna choose an all boy litter, and we neuter half early and we let others mature. The ones that are neutered early will end up being a hair taller than their brothers who were neutered later because it takes longer for the growth plates to turn off. Is that accurate?
There are studies that say, but it's a hair different. And from what I understand from the studies, it's clinically not significant. Yeah. So.
Well, I agree with you, Tina, that, we had a dog, one of the flat coats that we owned, Tex, was my daughter's dog. He came to us intact and we saw no reason to change, because Tex was great the way he was. The other thing is what Tex did have, though, was seizures. And we kind of thought, you know what? Not sure. Spaying and neutering is not going to make a difference on the seizures, but the anesthetic may not be something that we want to subject a dog who has seizures to unnecessarily. And since it's not an issue, let's keep him intact. And it never became an issue. He actually did die of a grand seizure. But that had nothing to do with spay or neuter. And like you, Tina, I was telling Barbara before we started, we had this wonderful golden retriever by the name of Hudson, who my daughter, who was Tex's owner, her first dog was Hudson. And Hudson, she was bound and determined he'd be the best socialized dog on the planet. So by 16 weeks of age, he'd met 750 people, and he was a true politician, could work any room, was the sweetest, best dog with kids of all kind. When my older daughter, who was living with us, she and her husband, when she had her first baby, Hudson decided that Ellie needed her to take care of her and baby Henry. And so for the first 3 weeks of Henry's life, Hudson would not leave Ellie's side except to go to the bathroom and have his dinner, or his breakfast. But, as Ellie puts it, baby Henry was not going to fall down a well on Hudson's watch. And I remember thinking, and we neutered him. He would have been the most wonderful dog to breed. And so I kind of wanted to talk as that is, and with your Jack Russell, the same thing, Tina. I want to talk about what's happening with the widespread desexing at the population level. How is that making a difference in the quality of dogs that we are seeing?
That's a huge that's a really, really good question. And it's when I really started to dive into when I neutered my last border collie at 6 months of age, actually, because he was undergoing surgery. And I was like, I'm an ethical vegan. And all of a sudden I start to think, I just cut off my dog's reproductive parts. Oh my God, I just, mutilated my dog, And so it, that gets into those ethics. And then when you start thinking about it, like I had 2 amazing border collies, which, because at the time, that's what I did as a responsible pet owner. I spayed and neuter. And then all of a sudden, I had all these people asking me, where did you get these dogs? Because they were such, ambassadors for the breed. And everybody wanted something, wanted ones like them. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And I'm thinking back to, years ago, I was at a workshop with Myrna Milani. And she says something to the effect that if we spay and neuter all the good dogs, what are we going to have left? And I think that's a really astute observation. So we need to, kind of look at what we're doing on a population level.
I would agree. I often think if mandatory spay neuter was passed, only the most at-risk animals would be in a position to enter the gene pool, right? So,
who's going to be responsible for doing those breedings too? Yeah,
and responsible, reputable breeders cannot produce enough animals for the demand, right? Precisely because they are reputable breeders, so they're not constantly pushing out, 18 litters of puppies. So, a good reputable breeder is often not breeding until every single one of those puppies has a secure, appropriate home before the egg is fertilized, because they don't want to contribute to pet overpopulation. So I think I will say that 20 years ago, if I went and did temperament tests at the shelter, the vast majority of those dogs were stable enough to easily go in the average home. And I cannot always say that's true anymore. There are some times that I go and do temperament testing, and I personally would not want to bring any of those animals home, right? The level of arousal, the level of prey drive, the lack of tolerance for frustration, the levels of resource guarding I see. And Occam's razor, and I would love to be wrong, tells me that that's actually about spay neuter, that we have eliminated grandma and grandpa's dog, who was a really nice beagle, who would hook up with the Jack Russell down the road.
Yeah,
and they would make really cute little puppies that were stable and just sweet, awesome little mixed breed puppies, right? From a good neighborhood, right? So yeah, I do. And I don't know that anybody's ever going to fund a research study on, are we making dogs more dangerous? I don't think anybody's going to ever fund that, because sadly in this world, all things become political. They have to. So it's who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for a study that says, is spay and neuter resulting in more dangerous dogs in our communities?
Well, I think one of the problems we have too is the fact that certain breeds become popular. So then you get the unethical breeders producing dog after dog after dog. And if their dogs don't, under horrific conditions, so these puppies are in prenatal environments that are horrific, and that produces more unstable puppies. And then they're raised for 8 weeks in a horrific environment. So now you have a puppy who had never had a very good chance to begin with, because you had a bad prenatal as well as immediately postnatal experience. And so it's just, you want to go in and just sort of neuter all those people's dogs. but you get these dogs dumped on the unsuspecting public, and then these people can't handle these dogs, and they end up in the shelters, and it's such a nasty cycle. And the really responsible people are like, oh, I want to be responsible with not only my dog, but I want to be responsible to my community, and so therefore I should spay or neuter my dog. And I think that's really been driven home hard. And I think that we're now going against a trend of how many ever 20 years of the spay neuter pushing, and I'm not sure that it's actually producing the results that we want. Are there really less dogs in shelters? Are there really less dogs that there may be fewer dogs, but the dogs we're seeing are so unpredictable and so difficult. And my heart bleeds for shelters. I kind of feel like there's three populations here that are really suffering. Shelter workers are really suffering because they have to deal with difficult dogs on a daily basis. Most of their dogs have real severe behavior problems. I feel sorry for the dogs who are coming into shelters who have not had very good beginnings in life. And I feel sorry for the first-time owners who want to go in and just adopt I just want a nice dog. I don't care about a pedigree. I just want a nice dog for my kids. And I kind of feel like he views my child as a baby wildebeest. And it's a tough situation. So,
I've seen that. I've seen a lot of that actually. And unfortunately have now experienced a lot of dog owners who have tried adopting from shelters and rescue organizations and finding the dogs are just so inappropriate for their lifestyle that they wind up going to a breeder, or they've had such bad experiences, whether it's a bite or an aggression issue. And, they're just like, nope, not doing it again. And so, I think that's changing. And then interestingly, the whole pandemic, there haven't been enough dogs. I don't know about in your area, but here, there aren't enough dogs to go around. Everybody wants a dog. And so,
well, and I would agree. Like, okay, so somebody goes to the shelter and they go and they get that dog that becomes a really bad, negative, horrible experience. You're not going to get donations from those people. They're never going to look at a mixed breed animal again. Like there are just none of it is simple. And there's a part of me that the stewardship piece is important. I think those of us who are in the industry owe the world safe dogs, and we owe the dogs safe families, right? And that means, honestly, that's what reputable breeders are doing. They are matching the right individual puppy with every benefit they can possibly give them with the right family. And our shelters and our rescues should be doing that too. And I know that can be controversial to say. There are lots of people who think we should save every single dog. And what I would say is that they haven't met the dog yet that's so straight up dangerous that they couldn't live with it. I think it's really easy to judge things from like this moral high ground when they're not having to live with a dog who's dangerous, or live with a dog who's completely unstable, or that their world gets really, really small because the dog is so fractious and so sensitive. So I how spay neuter fits in with all of that, and cancer risk, and like it's like a cobblestone.
Oh, it is.
Of road that we all have to go down to sort out what we're going to do. And I will go on record saying I have 2 mixed breed dogs, 2 purebred dogs. Every single dog in my home right now is a rescue. I have purchased, and I'm sure will purchase again, purebred dogs from reputable sources. I will also, I'm sure, get dogs from purebred rescue and from all breed rescue. Like, I do all of the things. So I have even imported, somebody's going to be mad about this, a dog from another country that is a rescue. So I'm sure I hit all of the things. If you want to be mad at me about something, there you go. I just gave you the whole laundry list.
And I'm going to respond to this is what I always tell people, because in training and everything, people come to you like, oh, I have a rescue dog. Oh, I got it from breeder. And my answer is all dogs need good homes. Let's just leave it at that. All dogs. And we, once a person has a dog, let's deal with that dog. And to get back to your spay neuter question and whether or not how this all affects, spay neuter, maybe one of the things we should be doing then is trying to support these often vilified breeders, support them in providing help behaviorally and physically sound dogs. If we change our attitude towards good breeders, I know when I got my border collie who came from a breeder from a ranch outside in Yosemite, he I remember telling a friend, my other dog came from our local shelter because my sister was working there and came home one day and said, do you trust me? And I said, of course. So here I have this lovely mixed dog, and I wanted to get him a companion that I knew was going to be solid. I didn't want to risk what I brought home to him. So I did my research and I found this amazing breeder and I got this dog. And when I was mentioning it to a friend of mine, she looked at me like I was, evil incarnate because.
Oh yeah, I've gotten that too, because we've had purebred dogs and people are like, but the only way to get a dog is to adopt a dog from a shelter. And I'm like, well, it's not the only way. It's one way. But no, I've had that too. Just there is something absolutely wrong with me for wanting a purebred dog.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and again, let's focus on making, it could be too that if we focus on behaviorally sound and behaviorally and mentally sound dogs, maybe this spay neuter thing won't be as big of an issue.
Good point. The other thing is like Tina said, my younger daughter, her first dog we got from a shelter. And if I had known then what I know now, that dog would not have come home with us. But I didn't know then. And it turned out to be, a very difficult situation. And we eventually had to have the dog euthanized because it killed our neighbor's dog. And so I'm one of those, I'm not going back to a shelter. And my daughter was 11 years old when she had to make when she made the decision to put her dog down. I was going to be darn sure that the next dog she got was going to be the very best dog possible for her. And that's when we got Hudson. And Hudson became her rescue dog. And I don't know who rescued who. I don't know if Emma rescued Hudson, even though he's a purebred dog, or whether he rescued Emma, but it was a match made in heaven. And, it's funny, every time I see a golden, my heart just breaks because I want another golden, just like Hudson.
But
I don't think any of us are saying like, oh, only dogs with significant major issues come from shelters or rescue. That's not the case, right?
Oh, no.
What I would say the difference in advocacy from my perspective, being the kid of someone who is a reputable breeder, is that a reputable breeder, if you're having a significant behavior problem or a significant health problem with your animal, they're going to backstop you. They're going to jump in and help. They're going to want that information. They're going to want to know there's a problem. And often they will take that animal back and they will deal with the consequences of all of that because it is the reputable right thing to do.
Exactly. In fact, that's how we got Tex, is that he was returned to the breeder because they didn't know how to deal with seizures. And we said, that's not a problem for us.
Right. And again, I pulled a Doberman from Doberman Rescue. I've pulled a pug from Pug Rescue. One had behavioral issues. The pug is deaf, right? Rescues don't always know. For example, the pug being deaf, I was not made aware of until after he lived with us. Because it's a little hard to tell whether a pug is hard of listening or hard of hearing. Those kind of look the same. But you know, I don't think the rescue like lied to me. Like there wasn't that. I think they genuinely didn't know. The dog wasn't in their care very long. So, you know, and he kind of pays attention a little bit. So, and he's social, he's happy. So he's pretty easy. So it even took us a little while to go, no, I'm pretty sure he's deaf. So, I'm not saying, none of us, I think, are saying like, oh, breeders are the best and rescue sucks. Like, I'm not saying that. I do work with rescue.
No.
And they're awesome, right? Many of them are awesome. I think none of them are easy answers. Okay, so Barb, I'm going to run through some of my old things that I have been told. So I have been told, the earlier you spay a bitch, the better the chance you're going to have incontinence issues as she ages. True or false?
That's a really good question. It's contradictory. All the studies are contradictory on that topic. And in fact, what's really interesting, that Whole Dog Journal, I corrected it numerous times, still printed an error in that last article, which I think is really important. And that is, so one of the theories is that low estrogen causes incontinence. However, pregnant dogs whose estrogen is extremely low aren't being reported as having incontinence issues. So, so is it an estrogen issue? Is it a result of spay? Don't know, but chances are it may not be. There does seem to be, the studies say, in general, yeah, there's a relationship. Again, everything's just a relationship. It does not mean it's a cause.
So is it that okay. Ugh. So for me, that seems like pretty important information to have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like knowing, would allowing your puppy girl to go through a heat cycle increase the chances that you're not going to have incontinence issues as she ages? That seems like important medical information to have. Surely someone should have done a study on that. It's not as if removing these organs from these dogs has zero negative consequences.
Right. There have been studies, but there's studies that contradict each other, is what, So one study will say yes, the other study will say no. So that's what I'm saying. There's no definitive answer on that. So you just kind of have to go, okay, what study do I like best? Palm and Reichler actually did a study where they treated gonadotropin releasing hormones, dogs with incontinence with that. And they found that this was a cause of incontinence, not the sex hormone. So, that's what I'm saying is there's so many different things that happen.
Oh my.
Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you. Yeah, it's some say yes, some say no.
So would you say,
but you stunned Tina into silence, so that's a cool thing.
Now who's snarky?
It's rare to have Tina stunned into silence, so you should be impressed.
So
with
what have you seen?
Not actually that rare.
Have you seen a lot of incontinence in spayed dogs?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. But I also see more UTIs than vets tell me ever happen in puppies. Like I see puppy UTIs constantly.
Yes.
And if you ask the average vet, they're like, no, it's very rare. And I'm like, well, not in my experience.
And that is true. That has been supported by data, by research, is that young dogs, they tend to have a slightly higher incidence of bladder infections, but they tend not to be chronic and they improve.
Yes, I would say that's yes. But my experience, honestly, is that the vast majority of puppies break with a UTI at some point. Mm-hmm. And while you and I and Julie know the frequent urination of small volume a gajillion times a day, we're like, we have a UTI. For most families, biting. And like this puppy that's insane, like their brain's on fire. I'm like, yeah, that's probably a UTI. Like the reason your puppy is completely out of its mind angry all the time is that he feels terrible. So I am constantly sending people to the veterinarian to have their puppy's urine cultured, not their urine. That wouldn't help. So that we get to the crux of the issue. Like go to causation. So, but I do see a ton of urinary incontinence in spayed female dogs. That being said, I don't get to see very many intact female dogs. So I have unquestionably a bias in the data that comes into me, because the same thing that, like, I don't see the dogs that have beautiful behavior very often. Most often I'm dealing with dogs that have pretty significant behavior problems. So it skews the data and the lens through which I look.
Exactly. No, I get that. And, again, if you look at Palm and Eichler, 2012, they successfully treated dogs with the gonadotropin releasing hormone GnRH. And so what that did is that it suppressed the release of those, in the body and not cured, but, mitigated urinary incontinence, which leads to the fact that it's not the removal of estrogen, but the preponderance of the superintengus implants, that doesn't make any sense. So what I'm saying is that they found ways to treat it that doesn't have anything to do with hormones. So is it because of spay neuter, or something else? And I think this is maybe a really good point, and this is one of the things I'd really like to talk about, if you guys don't mind, is that what do hormones do? And I think that's what we have to, that is a huge area of research, and we don't even know all the ins and outs of what hormones are doing in our body. And, we have receptors for estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. And then when you remove that, what does that do to the whole body? Not right just reproduction.
Right now, it just makes me hot randomly and kind of grumpy.
Yes.
And I really like salt. So,
Barbara, that's a great question. What is it that these hormones do? So if you want to find out the answers to those questions, you're just going to have to stay tuned to part 2 of to spay or neuter. Is that something you should or should not do? So we'll see you next time on Your Family Dog as we continue with Barb Dobbins, our discussion of spay and neuter.
Thanks for listening to Your Family Dog. Got questions? Interesting ideas? Visit www.yourfamilydogpodcast.com to share your thoughts.